brilliant helping us. So thank you to her. Just to tell you about who we are and what we do. So over the years, Mosaic have developed their style that we prefer, an account management style. So whether you're job seeking or recruiting, most of you will understand what a recruitment agency do. But what we like to do is a free of charge service for our job seekers, which includes CV advice, guidance on the local market, whether your salary expectations are realistic. If you're recruiting for your team, again, it's bespoke account management, so it doesn't matter whether you're recruiting for an administrator or a director or a head of, we'll get that same consultant that will work with you no matter what the role is. So it's tailored to you, and you're not having to deal with multiple consultants, and we aim for a best fit for your organisation. So feel free if you need us to help with it. You are job seeking, you need CV advice, interview advice, or whether you're recruiting for your team. Moving on to Helen and Julie. So this is the first time that we've worked with Helen. I've worked with Julie before. Julie Temple is from Birkett Solicitors. She'll be kicking us off today. I've worked with Julie before in person and on webinars. The last time I actually laid eyes on Julie was back in 2019, I think at Christmas at the lovely Orset Hall COVID, and yeah, actually in person. And we have discussed with Helen and Julie that we're going to aim to do an in-person event early autumn. So after the event, I'll be sending out a feedback form. So if you've got any particular topics that you'd like to be covered off, please do let us know, because these events are run for you. So they're only of use if you guys tell us, obviously, what sort of topics that you like covering. So please let us know. And yeah, Helen is from HR department. She's director of HR department. She covers Bishop Stortford and the surrounding areas. And if you're a business that's looking for HR support, that's where she can help you out. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to Julie. Julie, I think you're on mute still, but I don't know whether is that or something I've done.
No, it was just me to so that my tapping away on the keyboard wasn't interrupting anything.
Okay.
Yeah, 2019, back in the day when we could actually meet physically. And Nicola is just struggling with sound, and someone has very helpfully just said to check your audio settings. So up towards the top there should be 3 little dots, and you've got a device settings, and then if you just fiddle about with your speakers, hopefully you might be able to just get connection, but hopefully you'll be able to sort that out as we go through.
All right, anyone else struggling sound? Sorry, is it just Nicola?
There's a Nicola there.
Okay.
I might be mispronouncing, and I apologise.
Just let us know.
Yeah.
And right. There will be time for questions and answers, sorry, which I forgot to mention that bit, that Julie's got a couple of questions as we go along, so feel free to put any specific questions or queries that you've got in the chat on the side, and yeah, we'll break at certain points to go through those and then have a roundup at the end as well. All right, thank you. Over to you, Julie.
All right, well, thank you for having me, Emma. And this morning, as I was looking through the BBC News, it's what I tend to do when I wake up in the morning, I saw a rather timely article on return to the five-day working week in the office was the headline. But my phraseology has been somewhat different since March last year, and I use the workplace. And I mean, I think we are in a very interesting time as business owners, business leaders, anyone who is in a kind of management operational role, and how we transition from the world that we have been in during the pandemic, and obviously still are to a degree, and we transition back to whatever the future, or transition into whatever the future may hold. And there is this debate, which I personally think is a very valuable debate, around the value of flexible working and agile and dynamic working. And I've been advising on flexible working for as long as I can remember in a statutory form. And I will be honest, as soon as individuals, clients, commercial clients approach me and they're talking about flexible working, it is very often from the perspective of, well, flexible working isn't going to work for us as a business, and how can we refuse the request that has been made by an individual? And I'll come on to that in a little while, but I just wanted to take a few moments just to explore the debate that we do have currently around flexible working and agile working and dynamic working. So what do I mean, as the ambulance goes past? What do I mean by that? Well, the gov.uk refers to flexible working as a way of working that suits an employee's needs, for example, having flexible start and finish times or working from home. So that's the definition that's in the flexible working guide by gov.uk. And for me, it is the right to request flexible working as a statutory right, which has existed for some considerable time now. And it primarily allows an employee to request to change where they work, to work part-time, to adjust their starting and finish times, or to work reduced hours, or that type of thing. And perhaps from not necessarily work from home, but from a different workplace. And to my mind, it's a very much a, hold on, I need to take control. It's very much, if you look to the left hand side of the slide there, it's very much a kind of planned, fixed approach, albeit more flexible than perhaps starting at 8:30 and finishing at 5:30 and working in the office or wherever it might happen to be. And we now do have this sort of much greater awareness around agile working and dynamic working. And again, what do I mean by that? Well, agile working, and I've seen this quote a good number of times now, and it is credited to the British Computer Society. But me being a lawyer, I tried to actually find it on the British Computer Society website, and I can't. So I'm just going to say that it is widely credited to the British Computer Society. But agile working for them is defined as a way of working in which an organisation empowers its people to work where, when and how they choose, with maximum flexibility and minimum constraints, to optimise their performance and to do their best work. And dynamic working is a very similar idea, as quoted by Aston University in Birmingham. It's an approach where you deliver your priorities in a flexible way whilst maintaining service delivery. It is about delivering your contract of employment and the duties and responsibilities of your role, but with flexibility on where and how this is best achieved. So on the right hand side, we've got the agile or dynamic working approach, which is basically the individual decides, this is what I need to achieve, this is how I'm going to achieve it today and tomorrow and the day after and the day after. And that might look very, very different from day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. So in the first instance, flexible working, you might view it as being employer driven. It's a kind of fixed approach to the way in which you deliver your duties, be it a slightly adjusted hours or whatever it may be. And then you've got the kind of dynamic agile approach, which is you work when it suits you in the way that it suits you, and it can look very different, as I say, from day to day. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. We're in this very movable feast approach as businesses, in terms of looking at how employees can deliver on their goals, on their duties, responsibilities as employees to you as the business, and how that can be done. Now, from a contractual point of view, flexible working is far more easily managed. You adjust the contract to say that your start time is going to be 9 o'clock instead of 8:30, or your place of work is going to be, instead of Ampora Place in Colchester, for me it will be an address in Ipswich. I'm afraid I'm not going to give you that one. Or it might be you know, somewhere that I might choose to rent myself for the sake of argument, because I don't want my workplace in my home, or whatever it happens to be, or it might be something slightly different. Whereas agile dynamic working, as you can imagine, is a far more difficult concept to perhaps get your head around as a manager, because ultimately there isn't necessarily a start and finish time. There isn't necessarily a place of work that you would expect to find an individual within a particular time frame. It's very much more, using the phraseology, dynamic. So you might find that it's much more appropriate that you have a policy or a set of guidelines that you work within as a business. Now, Birkett Long, we've recently published our guidelines in terms of what the future looks like for us, and that's very much potentially a movable feast. But ultimately, I think from September we are aiming to be transitioning back into the workplace, but with flexibility agreed with team leaders, whereby individuals can work up to 2 days a week, where in effect where they choose, but that will be from home, and that those days can shift, and they can be dynamic in the sense of meeting both the needs of the business, but also individuals' preferences, individuals' demands at home, and so on and so forth. So as I say, I think there is clearly a difference between, for me, from a legal perspective, the flexible working, which is far more easily translated into a contract, and a guideline dynamic approach, which will enable adaptability, and you're not going to have to go back to the contract and amend it every 5 seconds, because the requirements of the Employment Rights Act say you've got to confirm changes to contract in writing within a month. So there is a lot going on there. Now, there's a couple of other points I just want to flag up from the BBC News article, and the issue that we have got is that obviously a lot of people, not everybody, have been working from home, and we are starting to see, and I'm sure you have seen within your businesses, individuals wanting to transition back into the workplace for a whole host of reasons. Some mental health, and Helen will be touching on that in a little while. Some because they've missed the team collaboration. Some because they might perceive that others have been in the office or in the workplace and they're getting greater access to their boss, and therefore there's this kind of fear of missing out. And, you know, what am I missing out in the workplace because there's this collaboration going on that I'm not part of. And also, you know, as a business, that is potentially being lost, because, I mean, as they say in the BBC News article, you can't schedule creativity time, because it's just not how we as humans operate. So this is all a challenge that we're going to face as we move away from the working from home guidelines that currently exist. We're expecting that to potentially change from the 21st of June. The PM has indicated that the guidelines are going to come away from the 21st of June. I'm not holding my breath, I'll be honest, but we will have to wait and see. But these are all things that businesses might need to be thinking about. And just as a matter of interest, whether you, if you want to sort of involve yourselves or not. Just be interesting to see if you as a business have already put something in place in terms of flexible or agile working for the future. And if you want to share, just pop your comments in the chat box. I'd be quite interested just to see, as a matter of interest, what's been going on and what you're thinking of for the future. So that's kind of where we are. Sickness, absence and home working, I know is, well, it links with performance as well. It's quite often something that businesses will say to me, well, look, if we're going to be allowing work from home, we're not going to have quite the same visibility about sickness, absence and indeed performance. And I have a degree of sympathy with that. But legally, from a managing sickness, absence perspective, there is absolutely no difference. You have your sickness absence policy and you should continue to follow it in relation to any employee who is on sickness absence, whether they are working from home and whether they are in the workplace, wherever that may be. Practically, however, and you can see there's some stats on the screen there, apparently in 2020, according to the Office of National Statistics, and it's a report that was published, I think, in March, the absence rate was the lowest recorded level it has been since 1995. Now, you know, to me, that's quite a staggering statistic, particularly when we're in the middle of a pandemic and you would expect sickness absence to be higher. But of course, there are a number of factors that are likely to lead into that. Individuals on furlough who won't necessarily have reported that they were unwell whilst they weren't working. Again, shielding individuals, and I hope not to offend anybody by saying this, but generally speaking, they will have a health condition because they are shielding, and generally speaking, individuals with a health condition might have more sickness absence. So if they've been shielding and not able to work, again, that will impact the recorded levels. We've not been moving around either, nor have our children. We've been home working, or more of us have certainly been home working. Our children have been homeschooled. We're just simply not mixing, and the germs aren't spreading. So there's a whole host of reasons that isn't necessarily the one that might automatically jump to the fore and say, well, actually, people are attending more, when attending work more whilst they are unwell and arguably shouldn't have been working. But as I say, ultimately, as a business, you need to be thinking about how you're going to manage it. How are you going to do return to work meetings in physically? Are you going to go to people's homes? If you're going to have this on a sort of future, more long-term basis, are you going to be doing return to work meetings remotely? How are you going to work out if somebody is unwell and perhaps attending work wherever they may be when they shouldn't be? And just sort of train your managers perhaps to think about signs for how you can sort of assess this and pick up on signs. And again, I know Helen will be talking about sort of mental health issues in a little while, and I'm not just talking about mental health here, but just think a little bit more widely around this issue and how you might be able to detect it and how you might be able to manage it on a more long-term future. Now, oh, there we go. So yes, that's just, I've forgotten we've got that next slide there. So that's just picking up on some of the points. You know, you've got remote employees and remote managers. How are you going to manage this issue? Reduced visibility of productivity. How can you manage if someone, you know, how can you notice if somebody's being, you know, underperforming in quotes because they might be unwell and they're not reporting in sick because they don't feel the need to. And as I say, how are you going to hold those return to work meetings and review meetings with them about their absence in the same way as you would do with anybody who is unwell when they're attending the workplace as they have been in the past. So flexible working requests. I'm just going to whistle through this as a kind of quick guide to managing flexible working requests. Now, as I say, this is a statutory right for anybody who has been employed for 26 weeks within the business. The right previously it was for limited reasons, but now an employee can make a request for any reason at all, has to be in writing. And the important thing for you as a business is to understand that you have to reach an outcome on the flexible working request within 3 months of the date that the request is made, and that includes any appeal. You can extend that time period, but that is by agreement only. And if the individual has complied with all of the requirements of the statutory request, the advantage of dealing with it as a statutory request as a business is the individual can only make one request during, any 12-month period. Now, there are 8 reasons under the statutory scheme that you can refuse a flexible working request, and they're listed on the screen. So you've got an additional cost attached to implementing the request, a detrimental effect on the business, inability to organise work around those who would be working when they wouldn't be, or where they won't be working, inability to recruit, to fill gaps. So let's say, for example, someone wants to start work half an hour earlier, or sorry, half an hour later, but actually that half an hour is the busiest period. Then you could, and actually, how are we going to recruit other than getting Emma on the job, to carry out a job for half an hour in the morning? That might be difficult. Detrimental impact on quality, detrimental impact on performance, and insufficient work when they're talking about working. So again, if they want to work half an hour later, but actually they're in a call centre and there's no calls during that half an hour, what are they going to do for that half an hour? It's really quite easy to shoehorn, for want of a better expression, why you don't want to agree a flexible working request under the statutory scheme. But, and this is the big but, and if you take away nothing else from today, this is the one thing I suggest you think about. Refusing a flexible working request under the statutory scheme is quite easy, as I say. The problem that you might have is the risk of a discrimination claim. You might have somebody who says, I want to work flexibly because I have somebody at home who is unwell and might be disabled, and therefore, if you refuse, you run the risk of an allegation, and I do say allegation, that you've refused the request, and that is disability related discrimination. Equally, you might have somebody who wants to work flexibly because of childcare, and again, I don't want to offend anybody here, but generally speaking, females have the greater responsibility for childcare, and if the individual is female, you might run the risk of a sex discrimination claim. Equally, I'm not ruling out the possibility of a sex discrimination claim by a man, particularly if females are being allowed to work flexibly, whereas males aren't. And there's a whole host of sort of potential risk areas where you need to think about it. Also, if you refuse a request, aside from an appeal, you might get grievances, and you might get somebody who decides that you've behaved completely and utterly inappropriately, and they might resign as a consequence of your refusal. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'm going to pass over to Emma, unless there's any questions that not Emma, Helen, sorry. So I'll pass over.
Thank you for those that have contributed with what their workplace is doing. Feel free to keep those coming through. And yeah, if you've got any specific questions regarding any of the matters Julie's discussed, keep them coming, then we'll do you want to do those now, or actually they're not questions, they're still comments about what people are doing, but yeah, save your questions for Julie and we'll run over any at the end if they're not covered in Helen's piece. So have you got control now, Helen?
I have control.
Excellent.
So morning everybody, and thank you, Julie. So moving on to remote working, which will cover some of the areas that Julie's discussed in terms of, dynamic working, agile working, because remote will cover all those eventualities. And as we know, one of the most significant impacts COVID has been where people have worked from. I've had clients that have got people working from abroad because they haven't been able to get back, and so various scenarios. So I'm going to look at some of the implications of working from home in terms of managing those staff, and also throwing into the mix another hybrid option of working. And I know some of you have put in the chat that you're looking at a blended, so hybrid and blended seem to be the same scenario, but it tends to be where they're still working office hours, but people are giving the option. And I've noticed in the chat some people have done that they're allowing a couple of days working from home, but the working hours tend to be the same as they are in the office, which from a management perspective is probably a lot easier to manage when you're working the same hours as your manager may be working. So very briefly, I will just look at health and safety. Now, it's not an area of expertise of mine, but I would strongly urge that if you have got people working from home, you give this some consideration and speak to a professional health and safety advisor. You need to look at risk assessment for the home working. You still have a duty of care with regard to the employee's health and safety. There are also still a requirement on the working time regulations if they're working at home, so you're still having breaks. And it's important that you look after the health of your employees, or make sure they are looking after themselves. And also importantly is the display screen equipment assessment. So have they got suitable accommodation at home where they can work? Have they got suitable desks, seating, lighting, etc. So to make sure that you're looking at all those areas where you have got people working at home. And some of the key areas from an HR perspective, as Julie has alluded to, is looking at whether you need to change contracts of employment, how you manage new hires and induction, and also about keeping your employees motivated and engaged when they're not in the office. And we'll cover this in more detail. And finally, I'll be looking at employee wellbeing and how to notice the signs of stress maybe with people working from home. So what I'll say here is communicate. You cannot stress the importance enough of keeping in communication with your people at home. Regular team meetings, you want to encourage interaction between teams. Do you use suitable platform, Microsoft Teams, for example? And also ensuring your managers are trained and understand how to spot those signs of stress. So looking at the onboarding and induction for new staff, so I think it's very important where you've got a mixture of people working from different locations. You need to be clear on how you are managing those new staff, and are the people in the office or are the people available to buddy up with them or manage them through that program. So do you set a full induction program? And this is not just for remote workers. I mean, obviously you could have this in place anyway for other members of staff, but do you have a full induction program? Do they know what they need to achieve during those first few months with you? Because it's the first few months that you need to create that good impression of the organisation and the professionalism. You might have a program that ensures that they are introduced to all key members of staff. They might spend 15-20 minutes with each manager of the department to understand how each department fits in with the overall organisation. Do you assign buddies to people? So again, if you haven't got all the key people in the office, do you therefore assign a buddy? That buddy may well be remotely, but it's someone that they can go to if they have questions that they don't necessarily want to ask their manager. And where you have that agile working arrangement, do you have sufficient training and induction for the people that are working maybe more the core hours to help those members of staff integrate into the business and understand what they need to do? You might need to change some of the working arrangements. So where you've got a blended approach and you're allowing people to work from home a couple of or 2 or 3 days a week, then you need to ensure that during that induction period, they're in the office slightly more because they might need to manage a new member of staff. So, and it's also important during the induction that you communicate and set milestones for them. So if you have probationary periods, do the employees know what's expected of them during that probation period? So if they don't meet those expectations and you suddenly decide the probation period they haven't succeeded, do they know why? So have you set those milestones? What are you therefore measuring against as part of that 3 or 6 month probation? And during that probation period, make sure that you have those regular reviews